The following program is a special presentation of Homeland Security Television.
Engine 6 to Manhattan. The World Trade Center, tower number 1 is on fire. The whole outside of the building, there was just a huge explosion. Engine 1 out of Manhattan. Engine 1 out, World Trade Center, 1060. Send every available ambulance, everything you got to the World Trade Center now. Freedom Manhattan urgent. The other tower just collapsed. Ready to collapse. Ready to collapse.
Came together as no other day when it began. I was the active captain of Hazardous Materials Company Number 1, FDNY. We had just been selected due to efforts on my part and my chief's part, Chief Jack Fanning, been selected as the WMD team for the Winter Olympics. I was selected, myself and another captain from the medical side, were selected to go down to Virginia Beach to receive the training from FEMA, USAR, Urban Search and Rescue, for the Winter Olympics. We're all coming there from around the country to discuss what we're going to do, create plans, protocols, and bring them back to our jurisdiction so we'd be ready for the Olympics when they came. I was sitting, having coffee, waiting for my flight at 9:15 at LaGuardia Airport, when I saw CNN come across with a plane that went into the World Trade Center. We just looked and we couldn't believe it. We thought it was a small plane. We didn't understand what the magnitude of it was at that point. As the reports started coming in, I turned to my other captain. We looked at each other and we just ran out of there. We knew that we weren't going to Virginia Beach that day. We started, Special Operations Command personnel started reporting into my location. We gave them the tools that they needed, re-equipped them, and sent them in teams, keeping strict accounting for what they have, what the capability is, and where they're going. It wasn't until when 7 World Trade came down, the sirens blared. I had already made a survey of the area for my own purposes, for deploying USAR and the USAR personnel, but I really still did not have a grasp of what we would face.
Marine 3 to Manhattan, okay. Connecting to Manhattan. Urgent, 289 to Manhattan, urgent. The World Trade Center's collapsed. Building 2 has collapsed, okay. Urgent, urgent.
Unicorn urgent case.
Everybody get out. We had to collapse to the second tower. Everybody's running from there. This is here it comes, get in, hold on. Division 1 acting to Manhattan.
I saw some of my men from Hazmat. They gave me reports that some of my men, I lost over 19 men from my house that day, were caught in there, and still we'll get them out, we'll get them out. When 7 World Trade collapsed and we saw that dust cloud coming toward us, it was an awakening, a real awakening. After we ducked that dust cloud, we began to really take account of what is happening, of what is going on here. Reports started flying in. 20,000 body bags, 30,000 body bags, 40,000 body bags. We had no idea what we were facing.
When I finally got in, we suited up, and I worked in downtown Brooklyn. I was a lieutenant, and we worked in a school security unit. So our first order of business, of course, was to respond to the rallying point, which was down at Ground Zero. And having worked downtown Manhattan before and growing up in the city, I saw total devastation. I remember telling my wife, it reminded me of a science fiction movie where they had a nuclear blast. The next day, now the smell of death was already in the air, because it was warm. It was a shock. I would say, it's surreal. That would be the way to explain it. I mean, you just looked at the Trade Center like, gee, these things would just implode like this, and these people would be lost, and they couldn't evacuate quick enough to get these folks out. I mean, people in general were happy that there was, and when I say this, I say only 3,000. Initially, they had said like 15 or maybe 30,000. I said, wow. So it was comforting to know that it wasn't a high number of deaths. There were a lot of police officers that I knew, firefighters that I knew, and your first thing was, finding out, did you know anybody? And it had touched a few of my neighbors that I lived near me. I didn't know that they had family members that worked there, people that I knew that actually perished in the Trade Center. But we had a military presence right away, and we were at that site and assisting family and friends of victims right away. I would say the third day they had set up a family recovery center, and that's what we were assigned probably for, I'd say probably 3 months. 3 months we stayed there.
I was probably a little bit crazy to even be there documenting. I didn't realize the emotional toll that it was taking on me at the time. Perhaps I was blocking it out, I don't really know. I grew up in Illinois on a farm documenting my dogs and horses, and it was a hobby photography. I always shot nice, happy things, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the worst crime scene or worst scene of terrorism on home soil, and I'm documenting it. And so I don't think my brain was quite trained to see such things. I'm not trained as a paramedic, or I haven't seen the things that a lot of my close fire department friends have seen, and so I wasn't quite prepared for that emotionally. Things I can't really talk about on camera, you know, human remains, certain human remains, jewelry always kind of hit me in the face. I purposefully stay away from the museum. I only come there maybe 2 days a week now. It's not healthy for me to be around it every day, energetically, to be standing around Ground Zero artifacts and images every day, which remind me of a very painful period in my life. And if it wasn't for the fact that I care so much about this subject matter, and I care so much about the people that come there, and I almost feel like I'm like, you know, the psychologist, and it has meaning for them when I show up and they're allowed to ask me questions. And so I subject myself to that maybe 2 days a week, but between you and me, it's not the healthiest thing for me or any of my friends who work during the recovery to be around things that remind them of the recovery. It can bring on depression instantly. You know, the other day we lifted up an artifact display because it was unorganized, and the smell of the artifacts hit me in the face, and it took me right back, and I immediately got depressed. All the images are special to me. I'm often asked, what's your most favorite image? And I often have trouble answering that question, because each image represents a puzzle piece. At the time, and even now, each image represents one piece of the puzzle that I needed to collect in order to tell the full story of the Ground Zero recovery. And so they're each special to me. If I had to narrow it down to one image, it would probably be the Bible page. I found a charred Bible page in the rubble. The Bible itself was gone. And I didn't realize when I found it that the verse was Genesis 11, the Tower of Babylon, the 11 in the tower. right around that period, I had not been at Ground Zero officially very long, but I had already made the decision to hang up my boots. I had had enough. I was going home every night smelling of human remains. I was depressed. I was crying, if not every night, a few times a week. No one was salarying me down there. I was draining my savings. I was not working in order to take this position at Ground Zero for free. And, you know, I had to ask myself, is this really worth it? Also, I was told by Rudy Sanfilippo of the Uniformed Firefighters Association, absolutely do not release these photos. Certainly don't sell them, but don't release them until I give you permission. So in my mind, I was like, well, no one's ever going to see these images anyways. You're wasting your time down here. You're subjecting yourself to this mental torture. I was not just a photographer, but I was trained as a recovery worker, something I hadn't planned on. But a chief one day said to me, "What are you shooting?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Then you're going to dig." And he taught me how to dig, which is unorthodox because I was a civilian. Civilians were not allowed to dig, but there I was, and I became quite adept at digging. I became quite adept at identifying human remains. I could tell the difference between bone and cement, or sometimes the bone was fused to the cement and you didn't want to throw away the piece of cement. It was very technical. And after a while I was just like, this has to come to an end. And then like something out of a movie, I find this page from the Bible, which moved me at the time, but it wasn't like, oh, it wasn't I wasn't like, oh my, the seas have parted. I thought it was cool, but it was then when I saw what the verse was, the 11 and the tower, I remember it as though it were yesterday. I looked up at the sky. At that time it was my ceiling. And I said, okay, you win. That's what I said. You win, I'll stay. And that's what kept me there. So if it were not for me finding the Bible page, I can tell you absolutely 100% the recovery collection would be 50% done and then never finished.
I really did not grasp the multitude of loss that FDNY suffered for a few days. It took us up to a week at headquarters trying to piece together everyone that was lost. And besides who was lost on the outside, the problem, we were able to pick them up when we knew that we were going into the hundreds. We'd never felt that losing 300 men, 343 men, we never thought we'd reach that number until the count started coming in from the individual units of men missing. On that day, I was able to, I was backed up by my men from hazmat operations. I left them in early evening to report down to the site to see what we needed to do. I was working, supervising operations in the evening into the late night, and it turned out to be through the morning, with my chief, head of special operations, Chief John Norman. We were at the West and Vesey location, which is on the west side, just north. And we started working with crews from construction to start moving debris. But for every scoop load of debris that we had, we needed to put it out on the street and have some of our men go through it for remains. I remember at about 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a high curb right there on West and Vesey. I sat down half exhausted. Chief John Norman came next to me and sat down as we tried to grasp the remains, the pile which used to be the North Tower. When I looked at it in the moonlight, it was a clear night that night, never forget it. I just tapped John on the shoulder with my elbow. Just look at the North Tower. Here we had a pile, smoke rising from it, men working on it, and right above it was a crescent moon. This crescent moon had a star on the back lower side of it. We just looked at it, said nobody will ever believe this, and we just shook our heads. We went back to work. In the morning, as the sun was rising, we sat down in the same position again, just looking at the new day coming. Exhausted, our men exhausted. And as the sun rose over the Atlantic, it came through the buildings, which were the financial center, and it lit up the North Tower. And it came in almost straight, right through the buildings. And at that point, we saw the steel, we saw crosses arising throughout the pile. Again, we just looked at it in amazement, knowing what we saw the night before and seeing what we see now. Crosses made of the steel of the World Trade Center, just rising across the pile because of the way the sun was hitting it. It was an amazing sight to me, an amazing sight.
While at Ground Zero, I had my faith questioned. I didn't really believe that there was a God, because who could let such a thing happen? I was down in the front lines seeing the result of a heinous crime. And so no, I didn't believe in anything. And I refused to go into any house of worship at the time. But then when I found that, it helped restore some of my faith. And then another thing that really helped restore at least my faith in mankind was with the amazing men and women that I had the honor to work with down at Ground Zero. They were unbelievable. Everyone was a tight-knit group, and I was very moved by the unity down there.
Came in, placed him in response mode. When the alarm came in, he rushed in, which is his way. He's very highly decorated. He lost his life that day, trying to pull people out of the South Tower, pulling them out of the elevators. My lieutenant that worked with us at Hazmat Operations drove him to the World Trade Center. He would not allow the lieutenants to come in. He gave him duties so that he would not come in. And he was saved. He was spared. Got a call on the second or third day that we were down there from his wife. She said, and this was relayed to me through another firefighter who took the call. She got a premonition. Jack is alive. He has a broken leg. He's above water. He's with the angel Marissa. Marissa is a little girl that he saved from a fire in Harlem during his days as a lieutenant in Harlem. She had since passed away. She did not survive her injuries that day. Tell Vinny he needs to make a search, find out. What I did that day was I grabbed the captain of Rescue 2, Pete Ruvolo. You must come with me. We need to get below. We need to go down into the pit. We need to go down underneath the World Trade Center. I was very familiar with it because of my days at 10 and 10. He came with me. We searched, researched. I knew the map. I knew where there was water because there's train tracks down there that go underneath. The PAT train goes underneath the two towers. Nothing. 2 days later, she called again. She was at a memorial service. She touched the robe of a bishop and came with another premonition. Said, Vinny, he's above train tracks. He's dry. He's still doing good. But there's a vision of a Kodak store. I had one of the last maps of the shopping center that was underneath the World Trade Center, the shopping mall. I saw 2 Kodak stores. One was around Vesey Street and one was over by Liberty Street. When we found we never found his remains, but we found his helmet. We found his helmet above the PAT train tracks, above water that had seeped in from the Hudson to those tracks, right near that Kodak store. And that's all we ever found to this date is his helmet, crushed. That's Jack.
A lot of people ask me what's the most important photo you ever took, and I always tell people about the greatest photo I never took, and it was of a woman who had lost her son, and she was at the site, and her son's fire company, all of them had been found except for 2 people, her husband and her best friend's son. And so she, the call came through that her best friend's son had been found, and the powers that be at Ground Zero broke the rules because they felt it was appropriate, and they allowed her to stand in the honor guard on behalf of her best friend's son, who was being carried up the exit ramp. And so, you know, she was standing there in boots that were 4 times too big for her, a big oversized fireman's jacket, huge helmet, and she was standing there trying to salute, and her hand was shaking and tears were coming down her eyes. And my first thoughts when I saw that, as I was standing about 20 feet away, was this is going to be my Pulitzer Prize winning image. And I went to raise the camera to shoot the picture, and I couldn't. You know, I just couldn't do it.